Greetings everyone. Thank you for watching this video. I'm going to share with you some of the direction I'm going in with my research project. As you can see, it's on social justice and the spaces in education. I'm going to look at three aspects of space in education: the mental space created by reading, the physical spaces of classrooms and colleges, and the virtual space that we've been forced on by us by COVID. So we're going to look at reading first. So there's been an inordinate amount of research to suggest that reading for pleasure, if encouraged at very young ages and encouraged right through to adulthood, has lots of beneficial improvements in life and in education. As John Goldthorpe says, that would we want to stop parents from reading bedtime stories to give their children advantages? Elsewhere, it's been shown that growing up surrounded by books has a lasting positive effect on the brain. Reading literary fiction can improve empathy. So reading changes the mental spaces. There's a lot of new literature out there around the science of reading, and I'm using some of that to inform what I'm looking at. And finally, I'm going to look at marginalization. Initially, I was going to look at BAME, but I think, as Darren Chetty points out, that children's literature viewed as a whole, as a secret garden, is a site that's a magical wonder and nurture, but it's also a walled enclosure where black and brown and often white working class children don't get a look in. So I'm going to look at marginalisation as a whole and how it affects the mental spaces created by reading. This is the practical element of my research. Obviously, COVID has ruined any physical spaces, but for the time being. But as you can see, that I've got a small in-class library chosen specifically to interest my multicultural, multi-heritage students. I work in a college group in London, and as Roy O'Shaughnessy, our CEO, said, that 2/3 of our students come from the bottom three bands of social deprivation, and some are living in the most deprived wards in the country. So any research that looks at social justice in my practical work has to be a benefit. So now I'm going to move on through social justice and onto physical spaces of classrooms. So Bell Hooks says that nowhere is there a more intense silence about the reality of class difference than in educational settings. Rania Hafez says that further education is a working class service. And Henry Lefebvre talks about the fact that the class struggle is inscribed in space, and this naturally includes the political action of minorities. So I think at the heart of my research is what Edward Sojo calls the Socio-Spatial Dialectic. People modify the spaces they live in and in turn are modified by them. And we can see a similar point made by Henry Lefebvre. He says that space and the political organisation of space express social relationships but also react back upon them. And finally, Marx, being quoted by David Harvey, says that the subject is thus regarded as both structuring and being structured by the object. As Marx puts it in Capital, by acting on the external world and changing it, man at the same time changes his own nature. Okay? So, and if Rob Smith is correct when he says that marketisation has had an impact on the places and the buildings where students and teachers learn, that's the question I want to answer, the socio-dialectic. If our spaces, academic spaces in colleges are being shaped by marketisation and neoliberalism, how is that affecting back on students? In a book on changing spaces in businesses, by the way, if we're talking about marketisation, well, let's look at the good practices in business. And in business, Rex Miller points out that more than 70% of the workforce either hate their job or just going through the motions. Half of all office space is wasted. And the number of people who suffer from chronic disorders caused or exacerbated by their workplace is alarming, scandalous, and exorbitantly expensive. So if business is prepared to acknowledge that the physical spaces that we have are not helping, then maybe a marketised, influenced FE college system should also consider that as well. So I want you to do a quick thought experiment. I'm going to show you some cool office spaces, and I want you to ask the question, if students studied in environments like that, especially students that are on the lower social bands and have maybe more negative connotations around education, would it change their minds? Okay. There's one there that's an office designed inside a pirate ship. How cool is that? This is the offices of Google in the Irvine office. I mean, who wouldn't want to work and study in environments like this? They're gorgeous. Okay, so that is the next strand. I'm going to, if I was to progress into a further, deeper, maybe a PhD, I would look at environmental psychology and how the spaces affect how our well-being and our studying change. And here again, here's the practical element of what I've been looking at. This is my other classroom. Those books that were in the other classroom are all now in that wooden trolley. I've got some indoor plants there. I did have sofas, although because of COVID, they got thrown out because the tables had to be arranged in social spacing. But that's the general idea, is to change the learning space so that it doesn't look like a class, it looks like a living room. And how is that going to change the students that I have in my classes? So the final thing, I will look at the space, the virtual space, online learning. I'm going to be honest with you, it's not something I am particularly interested in. I think what the COVID has proven is that students and staff miss the physical space. They miss the interaction. And I don't think that will ever be fully replaced. If it is, it will be to the detriment. I'm not against technology, I'm using it right now. But I think there's a case for it to be minimised and used sensibly. So that's my presentation, that's my research. 3 spaces in education: mental spaces for reading, physical spaces, and socio-spatial dialectic, and a final word on virtual space. Thank you.